Today's skeptic is Paul Ingraham, expert on everything pain science.
I had knee issues in my right knee on the outer side. Basically, I couldn't run for 500 meters.
I survived. I should have been killed multiple times, all the accidents I've been into. But about 55 years old, that's when I started focusing on my health around the time COVID came here.
And he said, yes, you know, your bones are just going to wear and tear a little faster than everybody else.
I'm going to be calling some BS on that.
The skeptic is usually right, but it's the dreamer who changed the world. Today's skeptic is Paul Ingraham, expert on everything pain science, creator of painscience.com, introducing our dreamers, aka longevity athletes, Melody Chang, the machine, number 3 in the Gen X Women's League of the Longevity World Cup from Singapore, Philipp Schmeing, number 2 in the Ultimate League of the Longevity World Cup from Germany. And from the last continent is Keith Blondin in Vertage on YouTube. Number 13 on the Rejuvenation Olympics from the USA. Coming up, conversation between longevity athletes who were really hard to find with chronic pain issues, but some of you guys hopefully have some good stories here, which you're going to share one by one. Every story is going to be followed up with Paul's reflections on it and then a free discussion, a general conversation before we move on to the next athlete. I would like to introduce Paul, but last time you were in this show, I had an introduction that I cannot make a better one, so I thought I'm going to just delegate it to you. Can you introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Paul Ingraham. I am a science journalist from Vancouver, Canada. I started my career as a massage therapist. That was where I first was interested in the subject matter, but I struggled with dissatisfaction with the amount of pseudoscience that I saw in the profession of massage therapy. I only lasted 10 years, decided to get out, and kind of fell into writing about it instead of helping people directly and clinically. I'm going to put in an early disclaimer here that I'm not a healthcare professional. I'm a writer. I work with a keyboard and have now for, it's 15 years since I last worked with a patient as a clinician. I also try not to present myself as an expert in the science of pain because my official line is I'm a journalist. I report on what the experts think and what the experts know. But given that it's my job all day, every day, to try to understand what the experts say, I do have an unusual perspective on the subject. And as the years go by, it gets harder and harder to deny that I'm some kind of expert in the subject. So, I'm not going to be giving any clinical advice officially, but happy to comment. And I like the word perspective. Happy to offer whatever perspective I can.
Speaking of perspective, how many research papers have you read?
As of this morning, it's probably up to 3,500, 672. So many. And they all blur together. Of course, they don't all get the same amount of attention. I have an immense bibliography, and I've read a tremendous amount of research in this field over the last 25 years.
All right. Well, let's jump right into it. So, who wants to start first? Start first with your introduction. So, the first person who's sharing their story, please start with an introduction before you share your story, your chronic pain issue.
I can go first. I'm Philipp from Germany, 34 years old. Actually, Adam's list, I'm actually 16. So let's see. So chronically, I'm 34, and pheno age I'm 16, evidently. And I'm relatively new to the longevity game. So since like 3 or 4 years, I'm doing these kinds of protocols. And I'm also into running a lot. So of course I do resistance training, but my passion right now is long distance, so marathon running. And actually that was not always the case. So I had 2 issues always, and that's why I'm interested. So Adam, we talked about it. That's what I'm interested in talking about that with Paul is I fixed both issues that I have with pain. However, since we are all talking about longevity here, hopefully I fixed them for good. And they don't come back at any point. I don't know, when I'm 50 or 60 or whenever. I have some aches still sometimes, but not as bad. Without talking about it, maybe I directly address it. First, I had knee issues in my right knee on the outer side. Basically, I couldn't run for 500 meters. Sorry, US guys, for the meters, but I cannot do it in yards or anything else. So I couldn't run for more than 500 meters. It was diagnosed as overpronation, but often it said or pronation, that I pronate to the inner side. Often it said it's totally normal and you need it, and some say, okay, no, then it strains your outer upper leg too much, and then I had some I think problems with bands in my knee, with the lines in my knee, and I said I couldn't run for more than 500 meters. And then I really went to a physician, did some strength training, targeted strength training on my knee and hip. It was shown that my hip is kind of not straight when I'm walking. I did some strength training, still doing it. If I don't do it for a while, it starts hurting again. Long story short, I could run a marathon at the end of the year. So I was diagnosed in the beginning of the year, and end of the year I ran a marathon with a lot of training, strength training. And my question is if I can fix it for good, or do I have to do this targeted trainings, targeted sets for my legs until the end of my life, basically, or is it possible to fix it for good? So I'm now joining a different another doctor who's diagnosing it because my left ankle was broken once, so that could be also a hint. That's it about my knee. The other thing I had, because I'm quite tall, so I'm almost 2 meters. I'm like 196, and I don't know if it's because of that, because normally everyone tells you, if you're big or if you're tall, you usually have back pain. So I have here. Often when I'm now standing also at my desk, so I try to stand a lot right now and walk a lot. However, I'm usually in my day job, I'm sitting a lot, and if I do too much and don't do resistance training, I don't know, for a couple of weeks, I tend to also get these back pains back here, and I don't know if it's so. Even if I push now here, it hurts a little bit here, so it seems to somehow have some nervous system stuff. I don't know. However, I see if I do back training or resistance training for my back, it seems to get better. But for me, it's always a question: can I fix it for good, or is it just normal? And that's what I'm curious about.
As you age, that's the question for everyone. Nothing is ever fixed just once, or at least you can't predict it. So when you said you're 24, right?
No, I'm 34.
Oh, 34.
But
still young. Still young. Yeah, it's quite likely that these problems will recur over the years, and it could be, it could be a gap of 6 months, or it could be a gap of 6 years, or 16. It's very hard to call, but very few injuries are one time only. It's usually the pattern of recurrence over time that's the real story, rather than an isolated episode. So, really classic example is Achilles tendonitis. Hardly anyone gets Achilles tendonitis just once. It's almost always something that crops up every few years for a long time. And I often see in younger people, younger athletes, the confidence, the thrill of victory. I've beaten it. I figured it out. I've got this thing dialed in. I know how to escape this pain. And then 18 months later, there it is again. And what worked the last time doesn't work the next time. And doubt and uncertainty starts to set in, and you start complaining about getting old. And that's the usual pattern. Before I go any further, Melody, Keith, do either of you have knee pain or back pain as well?
Yeah, for me, it's also the knee pain.
Knee?
Mm-hmm. Yep. I've had both.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So it's worth talking about both knee pain and back pain for all three of you.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Particularly the knee for me.
No surprise there. Did you, Philippe, did you get the diagnosis IT band syndrome?
Actually, no. It was what they told me is it's just I don't know the English term for it, but it's it's too much. My upper leg on the outer side, this muscle or this plate, I think it's a band plate there, has to have too much or is too much strained because my hip is not level, and then I walk like this and not like straight, so I have too much movement in my hip during and with the pronation in my feet. I somehow then strain my knee too much. I don't know because it was one doctor that told me, second one similar, or the physician I was in to do these targeted trainings told me similarly. Now the next doctor, so this was like 2 years ago. Now I'm since I'm getting a little bit more competitive on the marathons and want to wear these faster shoes, I have to do a little bit more training on the calves and on the legs actually. And I go to another doctor, and he says it's more on the ankle. So that the ankle is, because my leg was broken once, that this is a little bit strained. So it's somewhere, but what everyone has the same, or everyone is of the opinion that my knee hurts, but it's not caused by my knee. So it's either the ankle or the hip or both, I don't know. But the pain starts in the knee. Not because I think often of the syndrome, but more because it's too much strained in the whole leg, I guess.
So all the things that you're talking about are mechanisms of injury rather than the injury itself. So I would want to think in terms of what is the actual injury, what tissue has succumbed to the strain. Figuring out why the strain is happening, separate question. But what is actually the problem? The most likely diagnosis, this is not a diagnosis, but just guessing, probably what is usually called iliotibial band syndrome, or IT band syndrome for short. Melody, this is one of the two major types of runner's knee, the other one being patellofemoral pain. Do you know which category you're in?
For me, yeah, it's more of like my bones. Supposedly after I did an MRI scan, it's not normally aligned. It is a bit of an angle. So my author was saying that, I have a tendency to have more wear and tear. And I was actually surprised because I've been an athlete for a long time, like since high school. And I did a lot of sprinting and running. And I was like, oh, if that's the case, then wouldn't it be a lot worse off? Like, I've been doing so much running. And he said,
yes,
your bones are just going to wear and tear a little faster than everybody else. So
I'm gonna be calling some BS on that. So both of you have got mechanistic diagnoses, which is healthcare professionals speculating about the biomechanical reasons for your pain, as opposed to the conventional diagnoses. I don't know for sure which most common type of knee pain you would each fit into, but it's interesting to hear you talk so much about the theoretical cause being the diagnosis, which is a separate concept. Philipp, getting back to a marathon in a year, that's fantastic, by the way. That's really good. A lot of people with knee pain it's going to be 2 years before they run a marathon again. For a more casual competitor, you might get back to it in 6 months or for sure a year. But usually an episode of stubborn knee pain is going to prevent any marathoning for at least a couple of years. That's a very common scenario. You asked early on, am I going to have to do this strengthening stuff for the rest of my life? Regardless of whether it's good for your knee, you're going to want to do that strengthening stuff for the rest of your life. It is, as a longevity athlete, strengthening is one of your major tools, one of the best things you've got. And that's one of the best things that all people have got. It is probably this, at the top of the list of things that we have control over that affect long-term health. It's also fantastic prehab. Basically, no serious athlete should ever be thinking in terms of, I'm going to work on my body when there's a problem to solve. You should always be working to prevent problems. And the best overall way to prevent virtually all injuries is to be as strong as possible with as few training spikes as possible. We'll definitely be coming back to the spikes thing. But basically, methodical, never too much, too little, but always working on it forever and ever. and I can tell you, I exercise as more diligently than ever before. It's not like I exercised, I did some work to solve a hip problem in 2013 and that was that. It never ends. And definitely one of the features of aging is that the problems that they just keep coming. And so you've got to be prepared as you possibly can be. And there's never a better time than before that crap gets going. So if you've got some strength exercises for your legs that you feel are working for you, just keep doing them. I mean, they don't necessarily always have to be the main course, but, just keep going because that strength is valuable to you regardless of the knee problem.
I'll skip leg day, right? No, but my question was rather, so I do really targeted exercises for this kind of knee pain. If I at one point should switch to a more general. So of course I'm training like 3 times a week, my whole body with resistance training and what you said, with as little training as possible. So of course I would like to do more general or generalized exercises to be more efficient. As you said, prepare my whole body.
Right. Yeah, and I would encourage you to start making that switch soon and aggressively.
Okay.
So let's get into it. What's going to be a big general theme that's going to be relevant for all three of you. Some basics for the whole conversation. The rehab and pain management business was completely dominated by biomechanics for decades. And we now know that is the wrong basic idea. The overemphasis on structural and biomechanical stresses and abnormalities is a paradigm we call structuralism, being basically obsessed with the details of how we move and how crooked and straight we are. All that stuff was the dominant way of thinking about why the body breaks and hurts for decades, and it is now largely obsolete. What it has been replaced by is an understanding that virtually everything that happens, despite the fact that the body superficially looks mechanical because of the skeleton, it seems like structure is important, but really everything is biology. It's all about physiology and genetics. And whether or not a body part succumbs to physical stresses has way more to do with physiology than biomechanics. Every time something breaks down and structurally fails or just starts to hurt, there is some There's some amount of physical stress involved in that, but the tiny differences that are caused by something like pronation or by a slight pelvic misalignment, those tiny stresses are completely drowned out by other factors, which is why we now have decades of research totally failing to find or ever confirm correlations, let alone causal relationships, between things like pronation and knee pain. The physiotherapy industry, the big physio, spent 20, 30 years doing studies trying to prove that various measurable biomechanical variables were to blame for things like common running injuries. And it simply didn't work. We've never found any clear biomechanical risk factors for most injuries. What it's really about is load and physiological vulnerability to load. So you can have, and this is, one of the most fun and irritating facts about human biology. There are people with genetic gifts who just literally never get Achilles tendonitis. They can abuse their Achilles tendons for their whole lives and never have a single problem. Another person with different physiology, essentially the same physical stresses, maybe varying ever so slightly because of biomechanical differences, but if they look at their Achilles tendon, it bursts into flame. And that is a biological difference, and sometimes quite a profound one. There are quite large differences in how our physiology responds to physical stresses. There are, for instance, people who literally cannot strength train for genetic reasons. That can even vary from muscle to muscle. So the response to the stimulus of strength training can be radically different in two different people. Same with the response to a potentially injurious stress. Whether or not your knee flared up probably has way more to do with physiology, mostly variables we cannot know, than it does with the things that we can know, the measurable biomechanical stuff. And a big part of the reason that so much of the industry was focused on that stuff, it's what we call the street light effect, looking where the light is, studying and measuring what we can see and study, because it's easy, because it's right there in front of us, because it's physical and relatively simple. But the modern understanding of pain and injury and rehab is that it's really a physiology game. Okay, so that's some hopefully some good preparation for all three of you. Now the question of, should you do these detailed, specific strength training exercises? I don't think so, because I think that they are mostly barking up the wrong tree. They're working because methodically controlling load works. The active ingredient is probably not the specific exercises. It's exercise with well-managed dosing, with focus and purpose, that you're doing it in a relatively controlled way, you're avoiding spikes, whereas the amateur who isn't getting professional advice to do exactly this every day, they're more erratic, they're not sure what they're doing, they don't know which exercises are going to constitute a load spike and which aren't, that kind of thing. And so people do tend to do better with these precise, very specific exercises. But I believe that it's most likely that the active ingredient, the part of it that you care about, it's the exercise and the time and the load management. And you can do all of that without, right? You can manage your training better and do more general work and still get the same benefit, but also get the benefits of more general exercise and not wasting your time on highly specific corrective exercises. That's what we call them, by the way, in the business. When an exercise is intended to fix a specific biomechanical problem, it is called a corrective exercise. And corrective exercise is another great example. It's one of the main manifestations of the whole paradigm of structuralism. And it is even though most people still get prescribed corrective exercises, it's really, like basically all the experts in the industry are like, nope, no more corrective exercise. It doesn't correct things. So one of the other big problems with this whole way of thinking about rehab is that even if these things were the actual problem to begin with, you can't fix them. The exercises don't move the needle. They don't straighten your pelvis out. They don't stop you from being a pronator. You can try, but it's a wild goose chase and virtually impossible for most people to change these biomechanical boogeymen. So I would definitely advise you to start to ditch those specific exercises and just work on being as fit as possible, as fit and strong as possible in whatever other ways you think are important for you.
Would you say bench pressing for knee pain is just as good as squatting for knee pain?
Yep.
See. Then I get the point.
Seriously, I will explain. So doing squats, right? I mean, yes, you want your knee to be strong, but even that is a corrective idea. The idea there is you should do your quads, you should strengthen your quads and your hamstrings, you should do squats for knee pain, because the problem is that the knee is weak. That's the implication. But that's not the problem. The knee isn't weak. I guarantee you probably had stronger knees than I do when your pain started. I'm in pretty good shape for my age, but I have various medical issues that make it really difficult, and I bet you anything, your knees were stronger than mine, but you got knee pain, and I didn't. That's a good example of what I mean, right? It's about vulnerability, not about what stress is or how strong you are. So the point of doing squats is, that knee is too weak, and that's why it had a problem, so you got to strengthen it up, except I don't think that really is the problem. And here's where the physiology magic comes in. Have any of you heard the term myokines? This is about a 25-year-old hypothesis that's been pretty well validated now. We call it the myokine concept. And the idea is basically that muscle is an endocrine organ. And when you use your muscles, when you exercise your muscles, they pump out anti-inflammatory signaling hormones. Up to a point, depends on load, depends on context, but basically, muscle is medicinal. It produces many internal physiology communication molecules, which are all their whole point is signaling the body to prepare to adapt to a stimulus. And when you exercise, when you do a bench press, this musculature is producing medicine, anti-inflammatory medicine for the whole body. It is changing the physiology of the entire system. It is reducing your physiological vulnerability to all musculoskeletal injury. The point of doing a bench press is not a biomechanical correction of something that's wrong with the knee. It's to create a physiological environment in which the knee is less vulnerable. It's not a huge effect, but it is I shouldn't say that. It is a huge effect. I take it back. It is a huge effect because this is essentially why exercise got called the only miracle cure, the one true miracle cure. This is why exercise has such a potent reputation as something that reduces all-cause mortality, because it is producing physiology that makes you less vulnerable to all kinds of other problems. And so, yeah, I literally think that doing a bench press is actually good exercise for your knee. But you should do squats too. And for the very simple reason that it's the biggest muscle group in the body. And if you want to leverage that myokine effect, exercise all the biggest muscles of your body as much as is appropriate. So the quads are even better exercise for the knee, but not because they're knee muscles, just because they're big muscles. And of course, also they're stimulating the tissues of the knee directly. And all good loading is rehabilitative. All loading that isn't too much for you at that time is rehabilitative. So that's another factor that's going on with exercising the knee, with doing squats rather than a bench press. A bench press is never going to apply a nice moderate dose of loading to the knee. So the squats do have that going for it. So I would absolutely do the squats, but I would also do everything else as well. Pause for breath there, talking a lot.
That particular thing you mentioned with the anti-inflammatory response, I am a hyper responder to inflammation when I get injured. What could that be? I really swell up any injury.
Oh, yikes. Well, it's probably a great example of a physiological vulnerability, and there are only about 1,500 possibilities. I track these things out of professional fascination. There are many interesting examples. Have you come across the term exercise intolerance?
I've heard it.
Mm-hmm. Does it sound like it might apply to you?
Not necessarily. On the subject, I don't want to interrupt the conversation with Philip, but
sure.
I actually, it tore my meniscus by doing squats the wrong way, doing heavy, deep squats, bending my knee all the way, and my butt hitting my heels. It's just when I started to exercise, when I hit 55, that's when I decided to make the change and really turn my health around. And I was doing a lot of exercise the wrong way, just F around and find out type of approach. And I tore my meniscus, and my legs swelled up like 3 times the size that it normally is, and it turned black and blue from my heel up into my upper thigh. It was crazy.
Yeah, some people swell more, and these are, if you don't know why you have strong inflammatory responses to trauma, then it's just going to be a long-term search to maybe figure that out someday. But it's definitely, it is almost, being abnormal is almost this normal, right? Almost everybody has something like this. And often it's not obvious, right? I've been injury prone my whole life. I get a lot of musculoskeletal injuries, so I might be in a similar related category to you. And I had no concept of why that was, or even that it was. It wasn't clear to me for years that I was actually having an unreasonable number of injuries. It took me a long time to figure out, oh yeah, I guess there's something going on. So something's going on. No idea what, but we'll talk, when we come back to you, we'll talk about some related examples, some examples of things it could be. Philippe, if you don't have any questions, you want to move on to the back pain question a bit?
Sorry, can I have just a quick question? Like, sorry to interrupt too.
No, it's okay.
But would pain tolerance also be a factor in, your physiological side? Like, cause the author I saw, he said, I probably didn't really think about it, or I could carry on my intensity because my pain tolerance is high. So I mean, if someone has a high intolerance to pain, would that also, help in terms of like still continuing on and doing whatever you're doing at high intensity, and even though there's,
possibly, it depends on how the high pain tolerance is working. There are different kinds. So, for instance, there are people who are congenitally unable to feel pain at all, and that's a rare genetic disease, and it's catastrophic. None of them live past the age of 25. So, not being able to feel pain in one way can be a disaster. But some people are pain tolerant. It's not that they can tolerate pain, is that they have less pain to tolerate. So in the same sense that Keith has excessive inflammatory reaction to trauma. Some people have less inflammatory response to trauma. And so they're pain tolerant because they're putting up with things that other people would be like, this is terrible. But that person's like, no, it's fine. It's fine. I'm very pain tolerant. What you actually are in that scenario is stress tolerant, trauma tolerant, that you've got a gift from the universe of getting less inflammation when traumatized. And then there's a range, and there's other types of pain intolerance. There's emotional pain tolerance, for instance, where people, it's basically just that they're not bothered by pain emotionally. It's no less intense, and it modifies their behavior just as effectively as it does for less tolerant people, but they just never get upset about it. So there's a great range. There's many different types of pain and pain tolerance. And back to Philipp.
Yeah, for me, the question still would be, so I mean, it's that bench press can heal my leg. It's amazing, yeah, because I usually like that doing a lot more than squats, but no, just kidding. But for me also the question is, a lot of doctors, and maybe Melody, it's for you, maybe it's the same. They suggest then orthopedic insoles and so on, so that your feet are on a better position. This, in your opinion, is also then rather a mechanical solution, and we should rather focus on doing the holistic approach, or can that actually work?
It can work. And an important thing to understand about the whole, my criticism of the paradigm of structuralism is that it's not that structure and biomechanics never matter. They do matter sometimes. They just generally matter a lot less than you think based on talking to a lot of physical therapists. But orthotics it's a form of correction. It's not corrective exercise, but it's another let's fix the biomechanical glitch idea. And it is a crapshoot. And the way I teach my readers to think about it is you treat it like a drug that could have side effects. Orthotics particularly are a real double-edged sword. At the same time, to the degree that they are supposedly good at correcting things, they are also good at messing things up. If you think that they can fix biomechanics, then you got to embrace the possibility that they can also mess with biomechanics. And it's very, very common for people to actually struggle more with orthotics than without, especially at first. And there's always an impossible puzzle to try to figure out, is the problem that this is actually good for me, but I need time to adapt to it, versus is it just a wrench in the works that's making it's just a headwind I don't need? And that question is almost never answered honestly by a clinician who makes their money from selling you orthotics. They're always going to say, oh, you just need more time to adapt, or we need to make another adjustment. It's a very easy thing to make excuses for, and they do. So it's a great example of where, that's where we really need to rely not on professional opinion and clinician expertise, but on more controlled and objective research. And so, of course, lots of that has been done about orthotics, and they, on average, do not help people. There are definitely outliers, right? Like, it's an average. The research shows the average response to orthotics. Some people are going to get lucky, but most aren't. Most are either going to be just no particular reaction one way or the other, or their body's really going to struggle with it. It's like, well, now I have a new biomechanical stress. Thanks. So I think that orthotics are something you do. It's something you try when you're desperate. You put it way, way down on the list of options. If in another 10 years, you have had 7 more episodes of this knee pain, and they're all lasting too long, and nothing seems to be working for long enough, that's when you go, okay, maybe now it's time to try the orthotics finally. But you try it like a drug, knowing that it could have bad side effects. It might work, but it might also mess you up.
Maybe one or two last questions from my side. It's really, really interesting. So what's then your thoughts on, so currently I'm using shoes with pronation support, and I want to go away from them because they make these faster shoes not with pronation support. Yeah. And I want to run faster times, but usually when I go now, so I'm using the other ones now for like mid range runs and so on. But if I take them too long, then my knee starts hurting again. Yeah, that's a question. So what do you think about shoes with pronation support, or should I rather then say, okay, I start new with other shoes and start, let's say, with lower load again, or what would be the correct answer here?
There probably is no correct answer. It's a correct answer for you, and it would be based on empiricism. You got to try it and see what happens. So you're saying you've already noticed that your knee pain tends to come back when you start wearing the speedy shoes?
Yeah. When I run longer than maybe a 15K in them, right? Yeah.
So there's something, right, while you're still in a more vulnerable state. It sounds like you already know that your knees are not going to like those shoes. And so there's only two options. Either you don't do those shoes and you accept the lower pace, right? And that's just a limitation that, I can't use the fast shoes right now because my knee won't allow it. Or you do a standard stubborn athlete training response and you say, well, I'm going to train myself to adapt to that, because you almost certainly can't. Now, rehab is on one side of the equation. Adaptation is that you always have to do rehab before you can do adaptation. So you can think of letting your knee calm down as that's the first step in rehab. Get that done first, do that for longer, then start trying to adapt to the faster shoes when your knee has calmed down to the point where the faster shoes don't even obviously bother it anymore. But you do know, like, let's say you get to that point. You're like, well, I've tested it a couple times and I'm not feeling my knee when I wear these fast shoes. Does that mean you should go out and run a marathon in the fast shoes? Probably not. You should still do a training and adaptation process where you start wearing them more and more and running further and further in them. But even if your knee wasn't being obviously bothered by the fast shoes, in say 3 months, you still can assume that too much time in the fast shoes would be a problem.
Interesting. Okay. And one now seriously last is, you said with the muscular response, I can heal. So basically the example that chest workouts can heal the knee. Is it also with, let's say, cardiovascular exercise, so like zone 2 training or endurance training, or is it limited to strength training?
No, it's all use of muscle. There's different physiology with aerobic exercise, with cardiovascular, and strength training probably optimizes for the myokine effect. But any usage of muscle, right? The reason you breathe hard and your heart beats hard when you're doing cardiovascular exercises is the metabolic demands of muscles. It's the muscles going, we're working hard here. We need oxygen. Deliver it now. And so that the muscles are working, and that is doing the same thing. And that's why people who do a lot of cardiovascular exercises are very healthy and tend to live longer. Part of it. All right. Why don't we move on to Melody? Adam, sorry, I shouldn't take over. Sure, you should let you be the host.
That's okay. Well, after 52 minutes, I finally have a chance to make a correction.
Yeah.
I said Philipp was number 2 on the Longevity World Cup. He's actually number 3. I misspoke there. Okay. Melody, what do you have for us?
Sure. Just to share some background, I'm 48 this year. My pheno age is 35. I've been into fitness for a long time, like since I was young. So as I mentioned, I used to be a school and national athlete. So I did a lot of sprint, middle distance racing, like 200 meters, 400 meters. And I have to say that, I still have the love for running, but because of my knee situation, I've actually decided to kind of reduce the distance in terms of my running. Because I used to do sprints and then I went on to long distance running. I've done like triathlons. I've done one marathon, and I've done like a lot of other kind of races like Spartans, racing, obstacle course racing. So I've always been into fitness, and I always like to try something new. But in recent years, when I go back to long distance running, I feel like after, too long a distance, maybe more than 20 kilometers, that's when I start feeling that kind of knee pain. Yeah, I was talking about pain tolerance because I'm like, oh, it's just a tiny ache. I can actually still run. It's not sharp pain. So to me, I'll just continue running. But when I start doing like high intensity workouts, the gym that I go to in Singapore, I noticed that when I load too much, like using weights to do lunges or like squats, I feel like the knee pain kind of comes back. So in that case, I'm not really sure if it's the load issue like you mentioned about, or it's just that I already have this inherent knee joints not being as optimal as before, that there's more wear and tear. So, I feel that more. But I always find it hard to stop. And I would focus actually more on like upper body, like during the times when my knee kind of hurts. I'm like, okay, maybe I should loosen up a bit, rest it out, do lighter weights. And I feel like, yeah, it does help in terms of like my knee getting better. And then it's like, okay, I feel good. Like now I can start doing my running and, so it's kind of like that cycle. I'm not sure if it's a healthy thing, but overall I've reduced my length of running. So I feel that has kind of helped, and I still continue my high intensity workouts, and I've been feeling okay. I mean, now and then, like, the tightness in my quads come back. I'm like, oh crap, probably loaded too much. And then, okay, I go back to doing I still do mobility and stretching, in between my workouts just to make sure, I'm not working on tight muscles while exercising. So it's kind of like that cycle. I mean, to me, it's there, but if I don't feel the strong pain in it, I just continue doing what I do, and I enjoy running. It's just that, I'm more mindful not to put myself through too much intense pain.
Mm-hmm. Do you want to run more?
Yeah, I like to continue running more, like especially when I travel. Like to me, it's a favorite thing of mine to like jog around the town or like do a long run. And in fact, like a few weeks ago, I did that. Like I was in Lake Tahoe, and I did like some mountain running, but I did feel the ache the next day because I ran for like over an hour and a half. Just going around like in steep inclines, going up and down. So
specifically, what I meant is, do you want to run further than 20 kilometers?
I think I would like the fact that if I could continue running as long as I wanted, I could.
Wouldn't we all love that? You ever been to Vancouver?
As in Canada, Vancouver? Yes, I used to study at UBC, so
fantastic.
I'm familiar with Vancouver.
So you know that our seawall around Stanley Park is one of the greatest runs in the world.
Yes, and I've done that.
Fantastic. Well, here's a thought for you. It's possible that no one needs to be able to run more than 20 kilometers in order to be fit enough. That's a really, really good level of fitness. And everybody maxes out somewhere, right? Like everybody's got a limit somewhere that's imposed by one thing or another. 20 kilometers is pretty good. There's a lot of people who wish they could run 20 kilometers without knee pain. There's a lot of people who wish they could run 3 kilometers without knee pain. So, there's nothing about that limit that says, oh, you're in trouble, right? Like almost the opposite. It's almost like that limit, it's almost like a humble brag. That's a really great limit, which isn't to say, it can't be lifted. Maybe it can be lifted, but every athlete is always like, if you're an athlete, I think this is what qualifies you to consider yourself an athlete, any kind of athlete, is that you're always pushing your limits, whatever they are. That's almost the job description. And at some point, you've got to ask, is this good enough? Can I live with this limit? And there are athletes who refuse to acknowledge any limits. The ultra marathoners, for instance, as a breed, are like, no, I'm just going to keep going. And As you know, I don't care where the limit is. I will keep pushing it. But for most of us, most of the time, and maybe more for longevity athletes than others, there's something to be said for not getting too extreme with your exercise. At a certain point, you're flirting with all kinds of backfires. You know, the dosage is the poison, and exercise is fantastic for our health up to a point. But past a certain point, you're risking some negative effects. That overtraining is a thing. And so maybe 20 kilometers without knee pain is just good enough. It's a possibility. What do you think?
Yeah, I totally agree. I've definitely limit myself as well, you know, in terms of like, you know, running, and I have focused more on strength training for upper body, and I see a big difference now in terms of, you know, also strengthening my upper body. And it's actually good to know about what you mentioned earlier, like, you know, chest press is just as important as the squats.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about the biomechanics of your knee. Your doctor said that you've got some arthritis, correct?
Yeah, he didn't really say arthritis, but, you know,
Oh, didn't use the A word. Okay.
yeah, but I'm leading to it if I'm not careful with it, or I guess it's overworked.
Yeah, it's probably not. I said at the time, the only thing I said when you were introducing yourself was, I'm probably going to push back on that. Here we go. I did tell you a little bit about my dad. He's a Vietnam veteran. And when he was there in 1963, he was shot with a high caliber bullet just above the knee, and his femur exploded. Bone chips from knee to hip. And today, his knee, he walks, he kept his leg, he doesn't limp. He's got a giant cavity on the inside of his thigh where it just looks like a whole bunch of muscle has been scooped out, because it basically was. But his knee, it's full of, like, it lights up on an x-ray, tons of metal from the bullet, tons of inflammatory capsules. This is where the body attacks and encapsulates a little bit of chronic inflammation. Basically scar tissue. I'll just say scar tissue. Anyway, the point is, his knee's a mess. It's a, you couldn't ask for a clearer example of a biomechanical disaster. Right now, and for about 2 years, he's had way more problem with his other knee. His other knee that didn't get shot is the one that's bothering him day in and day out for about 2 years now. The moral of the story is, we have studied this to death. It's actually one of the, you would think that rehab and pain science would be better studied than they are, especially because of the relevance to elite athletics, where there should be a lot of money for research. But it's generally shockingly poorly studied. But if there's one thing we know, it's that degenerative changes in the knee do not correlate with pain and symptoms. The condition that your knee is in, never mind its little biomechanical glitches, but like the actual how gross it looks on an MRI, has amazingly little to do with whether or not it's going to bother you. This is a theme throughout all of musculoskeletal medicine, but it's particularly well studied in the case of arthritis. And arthritis is almost all the research is about knees and hips, mostly knees. So we know a lot about this one. You just basically cannot know what a person is going to experience with their knee based on what it looks like on a scan. It just isn't possible. And this is, again, it's the physiology story. We now know that arthritis is a function of metabolic changes, metabolic vulnerability, especially the response to infections. That's what determines whether someone gets arthritis, not the biomechanical condition of their knee, not load. So, for instance, you get an infection, a cold, when you're 12, and every infection involves hot spots of inflammation around the body, lots of variety, and it's those inflammatory incidents that determine future arthritis. That is the main mechanism of arthritis. The main risk factor is what infections have you been exposed to and what tissues did they irritate. That's what gives people arthritis, not load, not biomechanical glitches. I'm particularly channeling a specific doctor talking about this. This is not a radical or controversial opinion. It is progressive and it is different than historical medical opinion, but it's not, I'm not out in left field here. But there's one doctor in particular, Dr. Howard Looks in the States. I'm basically just, he's my cheat sheet here. He's particularly expert in this, and I've learned a lot about it from him. You might be interested in his book. So I would just put all thoughts of biomechanical vulnerability aside. What counts is physiology, and the best medicine, in the same spirit that bench pressing can help your knee, in the same spirit, being fit is the best medicine for knee arthritis. And there's a ton of evidence that being a long distance runner does not endanger your knees. It literally does the opposite. That being active with your knees is the best medicine for a supposedly vulnerable knee. Dr. Looks, he just is his big soapbox thing. It just enrages him. Orthopedic physicians are telling people, oh, that knee doesn't look so good. You shouldn't run on that. Because his opinion would be, that's literally telling them not to take the single best medicine there is. The best thing that people can do is what a lot of conventional old school and less educated doctors are telling people not to do. They're warning people away from the best thing that they can do. But I will add that it should be load managed. If you've got a 20K limit on your knee, that's awesome, but you want to make it 22, you can almost certainly do that, but you have to do it in exactly the same spirit that you would rehab from pain that strikes at 500 meters. Nudge up to that edge, and then you back off. Then another dose, slightly more. So it's, add 200 meters every week or every month. Just be slow and methodical about it, and chances are your body can adapt to it.
Yeah, that's the best kind of news to me. It's like doing what you love, and it's not gonna make it worse. It's gonna still be good, a good thing.
Yeah. What would make it worse would be loading spikes, would be saying, this limit pisses me off. I'm going to run 30 kilometers no matter what. That's what will cause trouble. Yeah. But doing it methodically, best thing you can do for it. Best insurance against future knee trouble is be as metabolically fit as possible. A theme which, as I'm talking, the more we talk about it, the more I realize this, be as fit as possible as insurance against future pain incidents and injuries. Boy, is it ever compatible with the longevity athlete thing. It's really fits it nicely.
Yeah, totally. But I'm just wondering, like, when you mentioned about your dad and how, it was his other knee that felt pain, could it also be because there's been compensation? Because this is what I'm worried about. Like, my left knee is not doing as good. And, maybe unconsciously I'm using more of my right knee, and whether it'll affect my right knee also in the long run, because you kind of like put the load on the other knee. Thinking that, you can. Yeah.
So compensation is the idea of compensation is that it's yet another source of asymmetric loading, that it's another source of biomechanical stress. And it is a source of biomechanical stress. I had a shoulder problem recently. And while I had that shoulder problem, I could barely use my right arm for several days. And I started to have problems on the other side because the other side was doing stuff it wasn't used to doing. So it is a biomechanical stress. But it is usually drowned out by the effect of other factors. It's usually either it's a relatively minor temporary problem, right? That it's the only problem is a little bit of extra biomechanical stress, which isn't that much of a problem on its own, right? So you can live with it. Basically, it's like, you are compensating and you can feel it, but it's not a big deal. Compensation is just another source of It's a temporary asymmetry. So it's once again, it's blaming the biomechanical glitches, which aren't completely irrelevant, but are just generally less important than people think. And in your case, with feeling, it doesn't sound like you are not stopped dead at 20 kilometers by bad knee pain, right?
Yeah.
So compensation is going to be minor. In my dad's case, compensation could be huge, except that it's now been 2 years of him suffering on the left rather than the right. And the right is the one that's in bad shape. So if anything, his right should now be compensating for his pain for 2 years of pain on his left. And this is another thing that happens with compensation is it goes back and forth, right? It tends to be a two-sided thing. And it's not just, if you do develop problems on the other side, well, then it's just going to start balancing out. Then the other side is going to start kicking in and trying to pick up some of the load from back and forth, but all relatively minor compared to the things that really do matter, like metabolism and physiology. So you might have some problems on the other side, but chances are you're going to be very well insured against those problems. And chances are if you do develop a problem, my bet would be just statistically that it's most likely that any problem that develops on the other side was probably going to develop anyway. With it, that it was just going to succumb to whatever vulnerability caused the original problem just on the other side. That it's more about that than about compensation. So yeah, I wouldn't worry too much about that. Basically, compensation isn't a practical consideration unless it's quite traumatic. So when you're dealing with rehab from major trauma, right? Like you've, broken your leg or something, then you have to spend some time and effort, helping the rest of the body with its compensatory tactics. But for relatively subtle long-term things, it's either trivial and or we don't know, but we probably don't know because it's so trivial that it's just too hard to pick up on in the research. And therefore, we also probably don't need to worry about it that much.
Thank you.
Okay. Did you have back pain stuff as well? Do you want to bring up a back pain thing?
Me, I don't have back pain. My issue has always been more my left knee.
Oh, it's just the knee. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. No more for you then.
Yeah.
Okay. Shall we didn't ever talk much about your back, Philip. We can still potentially circle back to that.
Okay. I have plenty of back issues, I'll tell you that. So I am 60 years old. I live about 20 minutes from the starting gate of the Boston Marathon. And I lived a generally healthy life, but I did a lot of bad things. I partied. I ate some junk food for all my life. So I survived. I should have been killed multiple times, all the accidents I've been into. But about 55 years old, that's when I started focusing on my health around the time COVID came here. I was one of the first ones that got COVID from a casino. It was like, I think around January of, 2020, I got COVID. So after I coughed for about 2 months and cleared it out of my system, I decided to start working out. And I went a little bit too heavy, and that's where I mentioned that I hurt my knee. I blew out my meniscus, tore it really bad, and that's my leg all swelled up. And I got x-rays for it, and they said, well, you'll probably be all right. Just let's try to do things naturally. If they had to, they'd go in and clean it up. But I was able to bring it back, and it is all right, but it's always letting me know it's there. And I'm actually sprinting now. I never figured I would even be running, but I'm sprinting now, and it's holding up. So that's a good thing. Onto my back, my whole spine, actually. So a little after I was healing up on that, I started getting pain down my left arm. And I didn't really know what it was. And I was getting pain in the neck. Ended up being 2 vertebrae in my neck, crushing a nerve. and pinch nerve. So these vertebrae were too close together, and I went to the doctor. He took X-rays and said my neck's worn out. Oh, gee, this is not the kind of thing I want to hear. And gave me some stretching exercises. And I was talking to my friend down the street, and he said, there's a place you can go for traction where they put you in the machines that pull you apart. And that would have been about 10 sessions for $3,000. And I said, oh, and you have to come back for refreshers all the time and say, oh, this is something I think I can do by myself. Stretch my own spine. No problem. I'll figure it out. I'm a handyman. So I was using an inversion table here and there for probably just for back pain once every 6 months or something like that. Hardly ever use the thing. And I said, I'm going to get on this thing. And I flipped myself over, and I took a towel, wrapped around my head, and I pulled as hard as I could around the back of my neck, pulled forward, just pulling my head away from my shoulders. And it felt really, really good. I was getting a lot of relief. And I would lay upside down for 15 minutes doing that. And I did it twice a day. So I was actually doing a half hour each day. Wow. And gradually, the pain went away. And I was able to pull the vertebrae apart, doing the same thing that I would be able to do through traction. That really, really helped out. And I got a lot of other benefits from inversion too, lymphatic draining and digestion, mood, to all the blood going to the head, hair coming back. Also, it was a really great thing I found there. But I also have been getting scans. Actually, I got one yesterday scanning my lungs, and I do have spine degeneration. So that's something I have to look out for. I'm trying to rebuild my bone density as much as I can, doing all the things for that, and doing the inversion, stretching, building the core, a lot of upper body stretching. My mom has a curved spine, and my wife's mom has the same thing. So I'm trying to avoid that. I think I have a lot of her genetics, even though I'm not a female, it still have spine issues. So I think this is something I really, really have to focus on. But also there's a thing where we have gravity pushing on us constantly and people are shrinking. So I feel good. I'm stretching myself apart. And I think that's about it for my back pain, but I am really, really working on it. And I think I'm doing the right thing. It feels good. I don't have any back soreness. I don't know what your view is on that, Paul.
We're going to need another 3 hours. Keith is a gold mine of interesting subtopics. There's a lot there, but let me start by saying I, too, have hung myself by the neck to stretch my spine. I have innovated. I have been a handyman with ways of tractioning my spine, so I can relate to that experience and to wanting to do that. It seems like you're doing pretty well right now, right? Like you don't actually have much going on at the moment with back pain. Is that correct?
Back pain.
Fantastic. And the arm pain is gone?
All gone. Oh, no pains whatsoever. I was overdoing it on the pull-ups on the pull-up bar last fall. Actually, it started last summer. I started getting shoulder pain, my right shoulder, and I had to back off on it. So I stopped for a while, gave myself a rest, and then I went back to doing pull-ups, got into it. Oh, I feel fine. And then I hurt it again. I wasn't giving myself enough time to rest. I need a lot of time, months and months. So right now I'm going on a pull-up bar and just hanging like 1 minute dead hang like this. So still getting the muscle action there, but I'm not getting the full, force on my shoulder. So I'm giving it a full year, which I'll go back at it in the fall and try to do some more pull-ups again. I'm listening to my body more now, where not to overdo it, not to do exercises in the wrong way. that's just something I have to learn. I'm learning all this stuff. I'm new to longevity science, and it's just a work in progress. I think I'm doing okay. I hit the 0.66 on the pace of aging, if that means anything to anybody, but it's just a goal I had, and I'm pushing it and trying to get further on that. So yeah,
I think you're doing great, and for your age and those injuries, to have those injuries in your relatively recent history, and to be doing as well as you are right now, most likely you deserve credit for how well that has gone. Probably mostly just because you're generally active and focusing on fitness. Exercise is the closest thing we have to a miracle cure. That's a great example of it, I suspect. And not to rain on your parade, like really not. I do not. I want to give you credit for that. But at the same time, there are people out there who had exactly the same problems, did nothing specific for them, and recovered in the same period of time. And it's possible that some of the specific things that you've done, like Philipp's specific leg exercises, it's possible they contributed, but it's more likely to me that the active ingredient is the general exercise, the general fitness is probably what has done you the most good. Let's talk quickly about your knee, because that's quite a simple one. Meniscal tears, like sprains. Philipp, was it a sprain you had, or an ankle break? Sprain or a break?
For me, for the ankle, it was a break. Full
break. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Bone heals quite well, although you often get some sprain along with a fracture. But when connective tissue tears, like the meniscus, it really struggles to heal, and those injuries tend to be forever. The weird thing is that it doesn't seem to matter much that people can have, like my dad's knee, like your knee, fairly, unhealed, profound disruption of the connective tissue, and it may or may not be a problem. And I strongly suspect that correlates again with metabolic fitness, that the people who are okay despite the condition of their cartilage are probably the fit ones on average. So you're a perfect example of what I think Melody should be doing, right? Your knee's messed up, but it's not bothering you much right now. You're doing well with it, and that's probably because of the fitness, most likely, not the condition of the knee. So just keep doing what you're doing, and don't tear it more with too deep a squat.
Yes, my father tore his meniscus, and it bothered him a lot, but he was not in good shape, and he was a smoker. He died at 58, so that shows you that. Yeah.
Right. Now let's talk about the example of the spine, which is, you're going to see it quickly. It's going to be the same kind of story as with the knee. Let's take two people, both of whom have something that seems really bad. This is impingement of their spinal cord. So you had a reduction of space between vertebrae. Another common one is that the spinal canal narrows. It's called stenosis. And it can get so narrow, or protrusions, arthritic protrusions, can stick into the space where the spinal cord lives and pinch the spinal cord. That sounds really bad, right? I mean, you don't want that. You don't want your spinal cord getting pinched. And it is bad. On average, it's not great. But these two people, one of them, you put them in an MRI machine, and the spot where the spinal cord is pinched lights up like a Christmas tree from inflammation, which is a thing with MRI. MRI can show inflammation. It's more reflective, which is weird. But on an MRI, a bright spot is literally inflammation, showing you the inflamed spots. And you can tune that for different kinds of inflammation. But in general, a bright spot on an MRI is inflamed. So this one person, the spinal cord is pinched,
And more or less exactly like you'd expect, it's inflamed. The spinal cord is inflamed. It's the inflammation of the spinal cord that causes the symptoms. It's not so much the physical pinching. It's not a hard enough pinch. To actually stop nerves from working from physical pressure, you have to push on them quite hard. But if you get them irritated and inflamed, those nerves stop working very well. And that's where you get the symptoms of myelopathy, which is fairly serious. The other person, exactly the same physical situation. Their spinal cord is pinched just as much. The other guy, no inflammation. Spinal cord is dark on the MRI. No inflammation. No inflammation, no problem. I'm the other guy. I have a significant impingement of my spinal cord, and I've had it for 15 years. I've never had a single symptom from it that I know of. And when I get MRI scan, it's fine. No inflammation. So a minor pinch with no inflammation. Weirdly, this relates to, remember what I said earlier about Achilles tendonitis, that some people, doesn't matter how much they use their Achilles tendon, it's fine. This is the same thing. Some people can pinch their spinal cord or their cervical nerve roots all they like. No problem. It's not a problem. Doesn't matter. Fine, it's a little pinch. Body can cope with it. No big deal. Other people, maybe the out of shape ones, it is a big deal. So whether or not you get symptoms from a reduction of space between the vertebrae, whether or not that spinal nerve root is pinched, it's more about the metabolism than it is about the physical predicament. Also, the space that spinal nerve roots go through, it's huge compared to the nerve root. It takes an incredible amount of collapse of the spine. I'm not saying your nerve root was or wasn't pinched. It might have been. But very often, doctors will diagnose that. They'll say, oh, your nerve root's being pinched. It looks bad to them. And sorry to pull rank on them, but they just often don't know what they're talking about. And it's simply that it looks bad to them, but we know that that nerve root is not, in fact, being pinched in many of those cases, or it's really subtle. And the real problem is the metabolic reaction to it, the physiological, dysfunctional reaction to it, getting too inflamed with too little provocation, which is a function of fitness and metabolic health and genetics, not the biomechanics of the spine. Which is why some people would have exactly the same problem that you had, not hang themselves by the neck, not use an inversion table, and recover just as well. Because possibly the main active ingredient is the constant rise and fall of metabolic effects. This is always changing. Like, it's not always the same. Some of us, we have bad weeks, we have bad months. We had an infection we didn't even know about. Who knows, right? There's all kinds of physiological variables. So someone gets a flare-up of this kind of pain. They go to the doctor. They get the scan. The doctor says, oh, that's pinching. Your spine is collapsing. It's pinching your nerve. What they don't know and what you don't know is that your neck was in exactly the same condition 5 years ago. But it wasn't symptomatic until 5 weeks ago. So what changed? And very often the answer is something invisible and physiological, like you had an infection you didn't even know about. Infections, like your COVID infection, congratulations on being one of the very first in the pandemic. Wow. Infections.
Well, Dick,
yeah.
I just wanted to mention, remember how I started out this talk? I said I was a hyper responder to inflammation. So that works into what you're talking about. Yeah.
You may have considerable variety in how you respond to tissue irritation. So for instance, you could over-respond to acute trauma, but not slow motion injury. Your stress fractures might not be inflamed, but you break a wrist, very inflamed. Who knows? Yeah. It's a good example of the kind of physiological variable that we can't necessarily understand or predict, but often explains these seemingly random flare-ups of pain. Infections are particularly good at stirring the physiological pot and have all kinds of long-term consequences that we're still just only beginning to comprehend. as longevity athletes, this would probably fascinate you. We now know from very recent but very high quality evidence that the varicella vaccine for shingles, which is a common adult infection, is a major driver of dementia, and that getting the Shingrix vaccine, that preventing varicella infections, preventing shingles infections, is the single biggest thing you can do to reduce dementia risk, because every case of that disease significantly affects brain health down the road. COVID, famously, because it's a strong infection, basically, has all kinds of downstream sequelae, most of which we still don't understand, but we know it hits people hard, and we know it has all kinds of complicated effects on all kinds of subsystems. And every infection we have in our lives generally corrodes our ability to maintain our fitness, generally makes it harder and makes pain episodes and injuries more likely. Your inflammatory thing, let me give another fascinating case study that informs lots of pain problems. I got a buddy who has a rare, or not rare, form of muscular dystrophy called, this is a tough one, fascioscapulohumeral muscular dystrophy. I can't believe I just got through that. I never pronounce it right on the first try. It's generally a subtle form of muscular dystrophy. Muscular dystrophies they're genetic diseases that affect muscle proteins, and it can be fairly subtle. And in fact, neither he nor his brother knew until they were about 40 that they even had the disease. And he discovered that he had the disease when both he and his brother started to lose muscle mass on the right traps. Identical progression in two brothers. They just lost that muscle. And that's one of the signature symptoms of this form of muscular dystrophy. But here's the cool part. The effect that that form of muscular dystrophy has on muscle is that it makes you vulnerable to muscle soreness after a workout. It gives you wicked DOMS, wicked delayed onset muscle soreness. And so when my buddy was diagnosed, he discovered why he had been reacting badly to workouts for 20 years. He discovered, oh, that's why I get so sore. Because his muscle proteins are literally fragile from this genetic disease. So when we all do a little bit of micro tearing when we work out, and we want that, we're adapting to it. That's the point. We want to adapt to a little bit of micro tearing. But with someone with this form of muscular dystrophy, it's not so much, it's more like macro tearing. They're almost macroscopically tearing their muscles every time they exercise them hard. Now, the point is, this is what I call a subtle pathology. And subtle pathologies explain a lot of pain experiences. And subtle pathology is probably the most likely big picture explanation for your excessive inflammation. There are numerous autoimmune diseases, many of them minor and subtle, that will never be diagnosed, that can cause that. So there's no way of knowing without a long medical search whether or not something like that, a symptom like that, is being caused by an undiagnosed disease. But it is definitely possible. Rare diseases are collectively common. Any one rare disease, super rare. But you put them all together, there's a ton of them. And this is time and time again a great example of what I mean about physiology affecting pain and rehab and fitness more than biomechanics and structure, because we are an unbelievable mess of the effects of old infections and the ongoing effects of weird diseases and genetic variations that are in a gray zone between pathology and variation. There's a lot of things on this list of what could cause that. Why would you get overinflamed in response to things? So there's so many possibilities. So many possibilities. It could even be the consequence of past misbehaviors with your lifestyle. Like, were you a smoker, for instance?
Never.
Didn't do that one. Yeah. But if you had, smokers tend to have, like 20 years later, they're still suffering physiological consequences. You know, it's not just diseases that do that. If you didn't smoke, and if you didn't wreck your liver with drinking, chances are most of your past bad habits you can easily fully recover from. Probably. Depends on what you did, but like the real
little
big
drinking.
Yeah.
I mean, I drank. I mean, I was partying when I was younger, and I was a child of the 80s. Well, I was adulthood in the 80s, and you know how the 80s were.
I do. I remember. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
So,
and you can bounce back from most of that stuff, but the smoking is harder to bounce back from, and liver damage is really hard to bounce back from. But okay.
Fun fact.
Follow-up questions? What next, Adam?
Well, some fun fact about facioscapulohumeral muscular dystrophy. Just today, the X Prize Health Top 40 came out, who got into the top 40. Oh, by the way, Melody here was an X Prize contender. But anyway, so there is in the PDF that they distributed, there is 10 million FSHD bonus prize. So
wow,
you can see that's something that they are interested in fixing as well. That they created like a sub bonus category of this facioscapular humeral muscular dystrophy.
And it's not even a rare disease. I'm not surprised they're offering a good prize for that, because there's a lot of it out there. And think about how many people are out there. It's like they're not fit, and some people might be inclined to blame them for it and say, "Oh, you're just you don't have the discipline, you don't have the will." Yeah, well, or I have pathologically severe reactions to working out. How about that? Yeah, it's and another detail to add about that story. Once my buddy and his brother were diagnosed, they realized that their dad had the disease. It was obvious in retrospect, but he was never diagnosed. He spent his entire life with some of the symptoms of that disease, never diagnosed.
Melody, I see you want to really jump in here.
No, I'm just wondering, because now I'm actually seated cross-legged, and then I'm like feeling like, ooh, my left knee is starting to have a strain. And I'm wondering whether it's like, you said it's not the biomechanical aspect, it's more like, the metabolic processes. But the thing is, like, I'm just sitting, I'm not doing any kind of form of loading or exercise, so I'm not sure what that could mean then, like, to feel a strain even while I'm sitting cross-legged right now. I feel like my left knee is like, kind of having a bit of an ache.
I've gotten through this entire thing without once using the cliched phrase, "That's a great question." But it is. So, couple things. So first of all, reminder that it's not that structure doesn't matter at all. It's that the other stuff gets neglected and the biomechanics gets overemphasized because of the streetlight effect. Physical strain still matters. It's just usually not the most relevant or important thing. Short-term strain is very easy to reproduce, right? You can stress any tissue like that, right? You can invent a way to strain any tissue right now in the next 10 seconds. So it's not hard to piss off tissue temporarily. And what is interesting about knees is you said, it's not really under any strain, I'm just sitting here. Well, here's the fun thing about knees. The knee is an intense joint just when it's bent, even when it's not doing any work. The kneecap, biomechanically, is a leverage producer. It allows the tendon to basically go further out over the edge of the knee so that it can pull with a more favorable angle on the lower leg. And so when it's a force multiplier, when you extend your knee, tremendous force is applied to that tendon. When you flex your knee, if you could put your finger between your kneecap and the surface of your femur, it would crush it flat. The forces under the kneecap are incredible, even without any external loading. So just flexing your knee. Patellofemoral pain, which is one of the two kinds of common runner's knee and may or may not partly describe your problem, is often called theater sign because people feel it when they're sitting in a theater for 2 hours with their knee bent, because just bending the knee, not running on it, just bending it, is constantly, the joint surfaces are being squeezed with amazing force, hundreds of pounds per square centimeter. And so you're just sitting there thinking, I'm just sitting here. I'm not stressing out my knee, but you are. And in fact, one of the most important things that people with knee pain often need to do is stop. Like, I'm doing it right now. I've got my feet are tucked behind my chair legs. And so my knee is at a sharp angle, and it's a bad habit because that is an insidious source of biomechanical stress. And it's not as important as the physiology, but it is still a factor, and it tends to be a much bigger factor than people realize. So it's a sneaky source of stress, which is worth understanding and knowing about.
Yeah, but the strange thing is it's only my left knee, which I have the issues with. But my right knee is okay. So
For me, it's right. It's exactly the same story, Melody, that you told. It's also when I sit like one leg over the other, after like half an hour, exactly the same point where it hurts when I'm running.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, probably related. I would submit that very few people can sit cross-legged for half an hour without some discomfort if they're older than 12. Like, most tissues will start to complain if you put them in a position. Immobilization hurts. So it's not that unusual. But, if it's reproducing exactly the same discomfort you have when you run, then you're probably stressing the same tissues that are getting stressed by the run. I was talking about just bending the knee, just the hinging of the knee. But I think maybe we're also possibly talking about lateral torque here, because when you're cross-legged, it's a different force on the knee. One side of the knee joint gets compressed, the other doesn't. It's a different stress, but same principle applies. It's actually more of a stressor than you might expect. So very often with doing runner's knee rehab, there's some coaching about eliminating these sneaky sources of stress, and sitting positions that irritate the tissues of the knee are always high on the list. Something important to deal with quite early on.
But in terms of like why it happens to one and not the other, is it because like...
luck of the draw. Like, let's just imagine, in an imaginary world where the forces were, both knees were permanently subjected to exactly the same stresses. One knee would still probably start hurting before the other one. So something has to go first. In this case, it was your left. But of course, we are asymmetric. And those subtle differences in biomechanics from side to side over long periods of time may explain why one side goes before the other. But it could just as easily have been the other side with just a little twist of fate. A great example of why it might not be biomechanical difference is minor past injuries. You might not even remember it. Maybe you had a minor trauma to the left knee 15 years ago. Effects of infections. I know this sounds weird, but infections really do affect joints. And there's some quite striking examples. And it's not, in the same way that you get a rash from an infection, it's not a perfectly symmetrical rash. In the same way, the body's inflammatory reactions to, immune activation isn't perfectly symmetric either. That's another example of how it could end up different, even if the biomechanics were identical.
Yeah, actually, you're right. Because now I recall I did like some jumps on a bench in Spain, and I accidentally knocked my left shin.
Well,
and I didn't expect it to be such a deep gash, but it was so deep that I actually had to go to emergency, and they did stitching to it. Maybe that impact came years later.
Yeah. And all it takes is a little elevated inflammation in the joint for a couple of weeks, and now it's a different joint.
Yeah, that's interesting, because I always feel like I'm right-handed, so, my right side, using more my right leg, right arm. So if any injuries occur, we tend to be more on the right side.
Mm-hmm.
So I was surprised when it was more of the left, and I thought, maybe because the left has always been compensating,
Yeah. And in another 5 years, you may no longer think that it's, you may no longer think you're prone to injury on one side. you might get enough counter examples that the theory starts to fall apart. To the best of my knowledge, it's an interesting question. Don't think I've ever thought about this before. I'm not aware that people tend to be prone to injuries only on one side. Yeah, not that I can recall.
So, I would like to hear one unpopular opinion on chronic pain from everyone. We go one by one. You may reflect on the people came before you or not. But, Philipp, what's one controversial opinion you have on chronic pain?
Maybe I didn't had it before, but right now, from what I learned, is no, it's quite cool because it's quite calming, I guess. I think everyone has chronic pain. It's just how you or will develop one chronic pain at one day. It's maybe just aging. It's just how you handle it, and it's basically, it's not like rolling the dice. It's not like, oh, these guys have bad luck and this have good luck. But I guess it's just how you handle it, and everyone is responsible for their own pain level and luck and can work against it.
Thank you very much. Melody?
For me, to hear from Paul, it was quite a wake-up factor in terms of not linking it to the biomechanics. Because for me, I always thought it was more of the biomechanics. Like, after finding out from the MRI scan, oh my gosh, my bone is not normally aligned. It's got at an angle. So I feel like, oh, that's going to put more stress. I'm going to have more wear and tear compared to any other person. So I mean, I believe in strength training. I do it, resistance training and all to help. But I always feel like, I'm kind of like doomed because my bone structure is that way. So, how is it ever going to help me, even though I feel strength training helps, so, I mean, that was a wake up factor for me in knowing that. And I appreciate that from Paul.
Thanks. Great.
For me, I believe in stretching. I see my cat and dog wake up from their naps and they stretch. I think humans, they don't even think about stretching. Maybe we're just overthinking everything, and that's just not even in our minds. But stretching to avoid injury, I do a lot of stretching. Probably like 50% of the things I do is stretching, and I think it's good for preventing injury. Like the runners will stretch before they take off and run, and the vocalist singing will stretch their voice. That's my thing.
All right, guys. I think we have to stay for 2 more hours.
Yeah, I'm very engaged in the conversation.
There's
Learning
plenty
more.
here, isn't there?
Yeah.
It's kind of fun applying my knowledge to a discussion with 3 athletes at once. That's unusual for me. I'm usually stuck in my own head in front of the keyboard, being a writer, and it's neat to actually chat about it with people instead of think about it. So thanks for that, everybody.
Thank you, Paul. Thanks, Adam.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Paul. Thanks a lot.
Thanks.
Thank you for everybody. It was a pleasure.